Spider-Man is one of the most iconic heroes out there, and because he is so popular, you'd think this webhead would always find a way to win the day, but it might surprise you to learn that that's not always the case. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. Take a look at other popular heroes out there like Batman. He usually wields indomitable plot armor, right? So shouldn't Spider-Man's popularity provide him with the same? But Peter, unfortunately, he isn't so lucky. And despite being well loved the world over, there are plenty of times that he actually hasn't come out on top. And instead, it's the villains who have won the day. Join me as we count down the top 10 villains who beat Spider-Man and take a look at some of their most victorious moments. Let's get counting. Number 10, Electro. Electro, even in his first appearance in issue 9 of the original Amazing Spider-Man series, was beating Spider-Man. At least, initially. When Spider-Man first meets Electro, he doesn't know what to do, and Electro gets away a few times before Spider-Man manages to stop him. At one point, Spider-Man even reaches out to try and grab Electro. Not a great idea. While Electro is in his electric shock condition, his words, not mine, it turns out touching him is deadly. Spider-Man survives the great electric shock he is given, but is forced to modify his costume in order to take on Electro in the future. He adds on rubber slippers and gloves, and likely in the future would make modifications to his costume, adding in rubber insulation in case he came up against the villain again, which he would many times. Because yeah, that's only issue 9. It goes on for a lot longer than issue 9. Number 9, Mephisto. Mephisto might not win in the most obvious ways, but he definitely is always sneakily on the up and up when it comes to him versus heroes. Any heroes really, Spider-Man included. In the case of Mephisto versus Spider-Man, that sounded more legal than I intended, but I guess we are dealing with binding contracts. Mephisto ended up helping Peter to get what he needed, but at a price. He required in exchange Peter's marriage to MJ, which for comic book continuity meant undoing that rocky but ongoing union. Spider-Man got what he wanted. Aunt May was safe and his identity was a secret once more, but I don't think he really realized what he was giving up until he experienced it. MJ didn't even seem to recall their marriage, although lately it seems to be implied that she might have known more about their past than she's let on. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you love it when I talk about villains, I love talking about villains, then be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here. I'm not just saying that. They don't just pay me to say that. This is the truth. Number 8, Chameleon. In his first appearance, Chameleon left Spider-Man running away in tears, ruining the day he ever became Spider-Man. Chameleon may have been apprehended in the end of issue number 1 of Amazing Spider-Man, but somehow it still felt as though he came out on top. Dang it, because Chameleon, he's a villain, so he shouldn't win. Although I am kind of rooting for him sometimes. During their conflict, Chameleon attempted to make it seem as though Spider-Man was up to no good, impersonating him while committing acts of thievery and fleeing from the police. Oh no! Even once Spider-Man managed to catch him, it still seemed as though Chameleon might get away. Fortunately, Spider-Man had his spider sense to let him know something was up. He managed to get away from Chameleon, but it was only because Chameleon's disguise had become damaged in the fray that the villain was caught at all. So Spider-Man didn't even really win that day. It was more just like Chameleon made a mistake. And it was like, dang it. Now it's revealed who I am because you can see the Spider-Man suit underneath and I was impersonating Spider-Man. How embarrassing. Number 7, Morlun. Not only has Morlun proven himself to be a formidable foe in various storylines, with him taking on all of the Spider-Verse twice in the Spider-Verse event and Spider-Geddon in the comics, in addition to taking out multiple Spider-Folks / Spider Totems along the way, but he also went toe-to-toe with Spider-Man in the other. The worst thing / I guess best thing for Morlun fans about this story is how Morlun doesn't just ever go for the 1-2 knockout. Morlun seems to prefer drawing out his victory, teasing his victim if you will, and enjoying Spider-Man's suffering. It's probably because Morlun's used to winning so much. He's used to devouring spider totems, so he's like, we'll just let this play out. At one point, Morlun devours Spider-Man's eye in a fight and beats him to within an inch of his life. However, while this definitely feels like a victorious moment for Morlun and Spider-Man was beat here, he would eventually recover, meaning that Morlun didn't get a straight victory over Spider-Man. In fact, he'd even heal his eye back. But of course, villainous victories rarely ever get to be permanent, so I think we still need to count this one. Number 6, The Lizard. While Lizard doesn't do anything crazy like succeed in completely killing Spider-Man or anything like that, he does beat him in the race against time to save his friend, Dr. Curt Connors, who, is also the Lizard. In the story Shed, the Lizard ends up taking over before Spider-Man can get there to try and stop it. Spider-Man arrives far too late as the Lizard seems to have permanently gained dominance after devouring Curt Connors' son against his own will. This victory would be one that would not only haunt Spider-Man but the Doctor as well. He would end up finding a way to cure himself of his lizard brain, but become stuck in his lizard form, kept in a containment cell for his crimes, but unable to bring himself to reveal Spider-Man that he had finally cured himself mentally of his reptilian half. This whole thing is just like a super big Lizard win in my mind, because even when Connors frees himself of the Lizard, he's still stuck in the lizard form, and he still is like, I feel too guilty to even be able to tell people what's really going on. So the Lizard really won, even though he was gone. Number 5, Mysterio. Mysterio recently got a pretty big win in the MCU, in typical Mysterio style, I must say. While he hasn't been doing too hot in the comics lately, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Spider-Man Far From Home, Mysterio managed to earn Spider-Man's trust and even infiltrate S.H.I.E.L.D., making them believe he was a hero from an alternate world. I'm not going to lie, even I personally wanted to believe it. It turned out this was not true, and while his backstory was a little different here, Mysterio here was still a master at illusion and a full-on villain. In the end, Quentin Beck would seemingly die during a confrontation with Spider-Man, but it turns out he had one more trick up his sleeve. And at the end of the film, we see a video recording of Beck that incriminates Spider-Man and also reveals his true identity as Peter Parker. He's going to be in a lot of trouble in the next movie, I think. Number 4, KRAVEN. KRAVEN's Last Hunt is a story that forever sticks out in comic book history. Especially in Spider-Man's history, it is a dark tale where KRAVEN finally captures his most prized prey, Spider-Man. What's more, it's also implied he kills Spidey. He then proceeds to take Spider-Man's place, proving once and for all that not only is he capable of capturing and killing the hero, but also aiming to prove that he's better than Spider-Man by beating down all his villains brutally. In the end, we learn that Spider-Man was not actually dead, but in a comatose, death-like state all this while. He returns, and KRAVEN acknowledges that while he seemingly won to do what Spider-Man does while keeping to his moral code is actually an impressive feat. Something that KRAVEN likely wouldn't actually be able to do. His final hunt complete, it's then implied that KRAVEN takes his own life. Number 3, KINGPIN. There are a few times that KINGPIN has beaten Spider-Man throughout the comics and alternate universes that we have explored. At one point, he actually manages to kill MJ in a what-if version of Back in Black, and while Spider-Man manages to hunt him down and even kills him, in the end, KINGPIN's actions turn Spider-Man into a villain. So I'd still consider that a win for KINGPIN. But what I'd really like to focus on here is the time that KINGPIN managed to kill Spider-Man in Sony's groundbreaking animated film Into the Spider-Verse, one of my favorite films of all time. Here, KINGPIN manages to actually kill Peter Parker, the current Spider-Man of Miles Morales' universe. Although Miles would also learn of alternate universes with their own Spider-Men, Spider-Girls, and even Spider-Pigs. He would also learn of his newfound powers and himself have to protect the city as a new Spider-Man. But still, when it came to the Peter Parker of his reality, KINGPIN killed him. He dead. He dead. So dead. Never coming back. Number 2, Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock actually succeeds in taking Spider-Man's place, not just by impersonating him, but by actually swapping bodies with the hero. That the two swap bodies, wah 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 wah, with Peter ending up stuck in the dying form of Doc Ock, and Doc Ock's mind now within the young and superpowered body of Spider-Man. Oh my goodness. Eventually, he would relinquish this form, giving it back to Peter when he realized he was incapable of making the tough decisions required of a more heroic spirit. But for a time, we'd come to know this version of villain and hero combined as Superior Spider-Man. And if you're wondering, but wait a minute, didn't Peter die in Doc Ock's body? Yes, but also his consciousness lived still on in his mind. It's a little confusing, but if you read it, it makes sense. It's like comic book confusing, just if you are explaining it quickly to someone in a list. Number 1, Green Goblin. You can take Peter's body, you can take his mind, you can ruin his reputation, but one of the worst things you can ever do to him is to break his heart. There are many ghosts that haunt Peter Parker, but one of the most meaningful ones to this day remains that of Gwen Stacy. Gwen was Peter's childhood sweetheart. Before he and MJ were together and were a thing, he was with Gwen, who was also a science enthusiast and academic like Peter. Gwen ended up being taken hostage by the Green Goblin and thrown from a bridge. When Peter as Spider-Man went to save her with his web shooters, it's implied that his own attempt to do so was what killed her. The tension from his web caused her neck to snap. Norman Osborn has remained one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains to this day, and for many, the moment Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy was where this shift really happened for his character, making him Spider-Man's greatest and most feared nemesis. What do you think are some of Spider-Man's darkest moments? Who is your favorite Spider-Man villain? Which villain who hasn't won yet do you think deserves to beat Spider-Man at least once? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I am your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you to stay nerdy, YouTube.